Welcome to What If Sleepstorian, where timeless tales unfold in a world of gaslit streets and moonlit dreams. Heroes, villains, and spectral shadows come alive in stories from a bygone age. Tonight, we begin with something a little melancholic, a tale of old friends chasing whispers through a city of secrets. Dim the lights, close your eyes, and let this gentle story carry you softly into slumber. Paris, 1890. Not the Paris of glittering ballrooms or romantic novels, but a city of damp cobblestones and flickering gas lamps, where the air carries the sharp tang of coal smoke and the faint sweetness of baking bread from a distant boulangerie. The Seine whispers as it flows, its waters catching the moon's pale glow, while the clatter of horse hooves on stone echoes through narrow alleys. This is a city alive with ambition and desperation, where dreams are sewn into silk gowns and broken in the workhouses along the river's edge. Can you imagine the smell of the air back then? The mingle of wet wool, roasted chestnuts, and the faint rot of the river. In this Paris, two men step off a creaking steamer onto the quayside, their boots sinking slightly into the muddy silt. Tom Sawyer, his hair still boyishly tousled but now streaked with the grey of his 30s, squints against the drizzle. His coat, once fine, is patched at the elbows, its fabric heavy with the damp. Beside him, Huckleberry Finn, lean and wiry, chews on a matchstick, his eyes scanning the crowd with the wariness of a man who's known too many rivers and too few kindnesses. They've come far from the Mississippi's muddy banks, chasing a rumour, a whisper of a prize that could change their fortunes, a sapphire necklace said to have belonged to a lost duchess, hidden somewhere in the city's labyrinthine heart. The air tastes of ash and promise as they move through the crowd, shoulders brushing against strangers bundled in scarves and shawls. The docks hum with voices, French, sharp and melodic, mingling with the guttural calls of dock workers unloading crates of wine and cloth. Tom's hand rests on the worn handle of a knife in his pocket, not out of fear but habit, a relic of boyhood adventures turned sharper by time. Huck's fingers twitch, itching for the open sky, but Paris presses in close, its buildings leaning like conspirators over the streets. This wasn't the Paris they'd imagined back in St. Petersburg, swapping tales under starlight. They dreamed of grand boulevards and champagne, of women with painted lips and laughter like music. But the city they find is raw, its beauty laced with hardship. The streets smell of horse manure and lavender water, the latter splashed by street vendors to mask the stench. The cobblestones are slick underfoot, worn smooth by centuries of boots, and the air hums with the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer and the soft wail of a violin from an open window. What would you have done in a world like this? A place where every corner holds a hustle, every shadow a scheme. Tom pauses by a lamp-post, its flames stuttering in the wind, and pulls a crumpled letter from his coat. The paper is smudged, the ink blurred by weeks at sea, but the words still burn. The sapphire of the Duchess lies in Paris, guarded by a man who steals from thieves. The letter came from a gambler in New Orleans, a man half drunk and half dead, who swore the necklace was real and worth more than a steamboat. Tom's eyes, bright with that old mischief, meet Huck's. "We ain't boys no more," he says, voice low, "but we're still better than most at finding what's hid." Huck spits the matchstick into the gutter, his grin crooked. "As long as we don't end up hiding ourselves," he mutters, but there's a spark in his eyes too. They've planned this heist for months, piecing together scraps of gossip from sailors and saloon keepers, a necklace locked in a nobleman's safe, a prize ripe for the taking. But the letter mentioned a shadow, a rival, a gentleman thief known only as Arsène Lupin, whose name dances through Paris like a ghost story. The two move deeper into the city, past a market where vendors hawk oysters and wilted greens, their voices rising like a chorus. The air is thick with the briny scent of shellfish and the sharp bite of vinegar splashed over fried dough. A woman in a faded shawl brushes past, her basket heavy with apples, their tart sweetness cutting through the city's heavier smells. Tom's stomach rumbles, but he ignores it. Hunger is an old friend, one they've both known since childhood. Huck's eyes linger on a boy no older than 10, darting through the crowd with nimble fingers, lifting a coin purse from a distracted merchant. Huck's lips twitch. He knows that game too well. They find a lodging house in the Latin Quarter, a crumbling building with sagging shutters, and a landlady who smells of gin and suspicion. The room is small, its walls stained with damp, the single window rattling in its frame. The bed creaks under their weight and the air tastes of dust and old tobacco. But it's a roof, and in Paris that's enough for now. Tom spreads a map across the table, its edges curling like autumn leaves. The sapphire, they've learned, is held in the mansion of a Comte de Vigny, a man whose wealth is as vast as his paranoia. The safe is said to be impenetrable, hidden behind a false wall in a library stuffed with leather-bound books and secrets. Huck leans back, boots propped on a chair, and lights a cigarette. The smoke curls upward, grey and ghostly in the dim light. "This Lupin fella," he says, voice soft as the rain outside. "He's trouble, ain't he?" "Like us, but sharper." Tom nods, tracing a finger along the map-synced streets. "He's a dandy, they say. Slips in and out like a cat. But we got something he didn't. We got each other." His voice carries that old Tom Sawyer swagger, but there's a tremor beneath it, a crack in the boyish bravado. Paris is bigger than Hannibal, its shadows deeper, its stakes higher. Can you imagine the weight of that moment? Two men, bound by years of friendship, standing on the edge of a city that could swallow them whole. The rain taps the window, a soft rhythm like a heartbeat, and the gas lamps outside cast long, wavering shadows across the floor. The air is cool, damp against the skin, and the faint taste of iron lingers from the city's endless churn of industry and dreams. They're not just chasing a necklace, they're chasing a chance to outrun their past, to prove they're more than river rats with big ideas. As night falls, the city shifts. The streets grow quieter, the vendors' cries fading into the murmur of taverns and the clink of wine glasses. Tom and Huck step out, coats pulled tight against the chill. They move toward the Ile de la Cité, where the Seine splits the city like a lover's quarrel. Notre Dame looms in the distance, its spires piercing the fog, a cathedral of stone and secrets. The air here smells of wax and incense, drifting from the church's open doors, mingling with the river's muddy tang. Their plan is simple. Scout the Comte's mansion, learn its rhythms, its weaknesses. But as they cross a bridge, boots echoing on the planks, a figure slips past. A man in a tailored coat, his face half hidden by a scarf. He moves with a dancer's grace, his eyes catching theirs for a moment, bright and knowing. Huck's hand tightens on Tom's arm, his breath catching like a snagged thread. "That him?" he whispers, voice barely louder than the river's murmur. Tom doesn't answer, but his jaw sets, his heart quickening. The man vanishes into an alley, leaving only the echo of his footsteps and the faint scent of cologne, lavender and danger. They stand frozen for a moment, the rain slicking their hair, the city breathing around them. Then, without a word, they turn toward the alley, drawn like moths to a flame, their boots splashing through puddles that reflect the moon's fractured light. The alley swallows them, its walls closing in like the pages of a well-worn book. The air grows heavier here, thick with the damp musk of moss clinging to stone, and the faint metallic tang of rust from a forgotten drainpipe. The rain, softer now, pattern against the uneven cobblestones, each drop a whisper in the quiet. Tom Sawyer's eyes narrow, scanning the shadows that pool in doorways and beneath overhanging eaves. Huckleberry Finn follows close, his hand brushing the rough wool of his coat, fingers itching for something solid to hold. A rope, a pipe, anything to ground him in this city that feels like a dream spun from fog and ambition. Can you picture it? The way the darkness seems to breathe, alive with secrets, as two men chase a ghost through Paris's veins. The alley twists, narrowing until their shoulders nearly graze the walls. The scent of lavender lingers, faint but unmistakable, like a breadcrumb trail left by the man who passed them on the bridge. Tom's boots scuff against a loose stone, the sound sharp in the stillness, and Huck shoots him a glance, half warning, half amused. They've tracked men before, bandits on the Mississippi, gamblers in smoky salons. But this feels different. This man, if he is Arsène Lupin, moves with a purpose that's both deliberate and elusive, like a melody you can't quite hum. The air tastes of wet earth and anticipation, and the distant hum of the city, carriage wheels, tavern laughter, fades into a muffled heartbeat. They round a corner, and the alley opens into a small courtyard, hemmed in by sagging buildings with shuttered windows. A single gas lamp sputters in the centre, its light casting a golden halo that barely reaches the edges of the cobbles. The rain gleams on the stones, turning them into a mosaic of silver and shadow. Tom pauses, his breath clouding in the cool air, and Huck leans against a wall, his eyes flicking upward to the rooftops. "He's gone," Huck murmurs, voice low, but there's no frustration in it, only the quiet thrill of a hunt begins. "Slipped us like a fish." Tom's lips quirk, that old boyish grin surfacing despite the years. "Fish don't leave trails," he says, crouching to touch the ground where a faint scuff mark mars the wet stone. It's not much, a heel's imprint perhaps, or the drag of a cloak, but it's enough to keep them moving. The courtyard smells of stale wine and wood smoke, the remnants of some forgotten gathering, and the air carries the faint clink of glass from a nearby tavern. What would you have felt in their place? The pulse of danger, yes, but also the pull of something bigger, a game where the stakes are a sapphire and a name whispered in fear and awe. They cross the courtyard, their shadows stretching long and thin, and find another alley leading toward the heart of the Ile de la Cité. The Comte de Vigny's mansion lies not far from here, its iron gates and ivy-clad walls a fortress amid the city's churn. Tom's mind races, piecing together the plan they've honed over months. Find the library, locate the false wall, crack the safe. But now there's a new variable, a man who moves like a phantom and knows somehow that they're here. Huck's voice breaks the silence soft as the rain. "You reckon he's after the same prize?" Tom doesn't answer right away. He's thinking of the letter from New Orleans. It's warning about a thief who steals from thieves. "If he is," he says finally, "he's got a head start. But we got grit he didn't." Huck chuckles, the sound warm in the cold night, and they press on, the alley guiding them like a river through stone. The city shifts around them, its rhythm subtle but alive. The air grows sharper as they near the Seine again, the river's muddy scent mingling with the waxen sweetness of candles burning in a nearby chapel. The sound of bells tolls softly, marking the hour, midnight perhaps, or later. The streets are quieter now, the vendors gone, their stalls shuttered against the damp. Only the occasional figure moves in the distance, a woman hurrying home, her shawl pulled tight, a man staggering from a tavern, his laughter slurred and fleeting. Paris at night is a different creature, its glamour stripped away, its bones laid bare. How different would your life feel in those narrow streets and flickering lamplight? They reach a wider street, lined with grand houses whose windows glow faintly behind heavy curtains. The Comte's mansion looms ahead, its silhouette stark against the moonlit sky. The gates are wrought iron, twisted into ornate patterns that belie their strength, and the walls are high, topped with spikes that gleam like teeth. Tom and Huck slip into the shadow of a chestnut tree, its leaves dripping rain onto their shoulders. The air here smells of wet bark and polished leather, the latter wafting from a carriage that rumbles past, its driver hunched against the weather. Huck's eyes trace the mansion's facade, counting windows, noting the flicker of candlelight in an upper room. "Big place," he mutters. "Too big for just one man." Tom nods, his mind already inside, imagining the library with its rows of books and the safe hidden behind a panel. They've cased houses before, plantation manors, riverfront warehouses. But this is different. The Comte is no small-town merchant. He's a man with enemies and guards and secrets worth killing for. As they watch, a figure appears at the gate. Not a guard, but a woman, her cloak dark and heavy with rain. She moves with purpose, her face hidden by a hood, and slips a key into the lock. The gate creaks open, and she glances over her shoulder, her eyes catching the lamplight for a moment. They're sharp, those eyes, and Huck feels a prickle at the back of his neck. "She ain't no servant," he whispers, and Tom's hand tightens on his arm, a silent agreement. They wait, breathless, as the woman disappears into the courtyard, the gate swinging shut behind her. The rain picks up, a steady drizzle that blurs the world into shades of grey. Tom's coat is soaked through, the cold seeping into his bones, but he barely notices. His mind is on the woman, the man in the alley, the sapphire waiting somewhere beyond those walls. Huck shifts, his boots squelching in the mud, and lights another cigarette, the match flaring briefly before the damp snuffs it out. "We going in tonight?" he asks, voice soft but steady. Tom shakes his head, his eyes still on the mansion. "Not yet," he says. "We need to know the game first, who's playing and what they're holding." Huck nods, exhaling smoke that mingles with the fog. They're patient men shaped by years of waiting, for steamboats, for marks, for second chances. But Paris tests that patience, its secrets layered like the city itself, each one buried beneath another. They turn away from the mansion, retracing their steps through the rain-slick streets. The air grows warmer as they move, the scent of baking bread returning, faint but comforting, from an early-rising baker's oven. The city is waking, its pulse quickening, and Tom feels it in his chest, a rhythm that's both foreign and familiar, like the Mississippi's current under a raft. Huck's hand brushes his shoulder, a wordless check-in, and Tom nods, his grin faint but real. They're in this together, come what may. The alley they'd followed earlier lies ahead, its mouth dark and inviting. They pause at its edge, the rain a soft curtain between them and the world. Somewhere in that darkness a man waits, or perhaps he doesn't. Perhaps he's already moved on, a step ahead in a game they're only beginning to understand. The air tastes of salt and iron, the Seine's breath mingling with the city's endless churn, and as they step forward, the cobblestones slick beneath their boots. The story weaves itself tighter, thread by thread, pulling them deeper into Paris's heart. The alley draws them in, its shadows folding around Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn like a cloak woven from the night itself. The cobblestones, slick with rain, gleam faintly under the moon's watchful eye, each step a soft splash that echoes in the narrow passage. The air is dense, carrying the earthy scent of wet stone and the faint, acrid bite of charcoal from a brazier left smouldering in a nearby doorway. Tom's breath catches in his throat, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. Paris, with its labyrinth of secrets, feels alive, its pulse thrumming beneath their boots. Huck's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, dart to the rooftops, where the silhouettes of chimneys jut like jagged teeth against the sky. Can you feel it? The way the city holds its breath, as if it knows these men are chasing more than a sapphire. They're chasing a legend. The lavender scent lingers, a ghostly thread pulling them deeper into the maze. It's fainter now, diluted by the rain, but enough to keep Tom's heart steady, his mind fixed on the man who slipped past them on the bridge. Arsène Lupin, if that was him, moves like a whisper, leaving only traces, a scuff mark, a whiff of cologne, a ripple in the city's rhythm. The alley bends, its walls streaked with damp moss that brushes against Huck's sleeve, cool and velvet soft. The sound of their footsteps mingles with the distant clatter of a carriage, its wheels grinding over the broader streets beyond. The air tastes of iron and mist, a reminder of the Seine's nearness, its waters weaving through Paris like veins through flesh. Huck pauses, his hand resting on a crumbling brick wall, and tilts his head, listening. "Hear that?" he murmurs, voice barely louder than the rain. Tom stops, ears straining. At first, there's nothing but the city's hum, the soft patter of drizzle, the creak of a shutter swaying in the breeze. Then, faint but unmistakable, comes the sound of metal on stone, a rhythmic tap like a key against a pipe. It's close, too close, and Tom's hand slips to the knife in his pocket, its handle worn smooth by years of restless fingers. Huck's grin is gone, replaced by the taut focus of a man who slept under stars and dodged lawmen's lanterns. They move forward, slower now, their shadows merging with the alley's darkness. The passage opens into a small plaza, barely more than a gap between buildings, where the rain pools in cracked flagstones. A single lantern hangs from a rusted hook, its flame guttering in the wind, casting light that dances like a fever dream. The tapping stops, and the silence that follows is heavy, pressing against their chests. Tom's eyes scan the plaza, catching on a figure leaning against a doorway. Not the man from the bridge, but a boy, no older than 12, his cap pulled low over a face smudged with soot. He's whittling a stick, the blade of his knife glinting as it catches the lantern's glow. The air smells of wood shavings and cheap tobacco, the latter curling from a cigarette dangling from the boy's lips. Huck steps forward, his boots silent on the wet stone, and the boy looks up, his eyes sharp and unchildlike. "You lost, monsieur?" he asks, his French clipped but clear, laced with the street's rough cadence. Tom's lips twitch, recognizing the game. This boy's no innocent, no more than they were at his age, running scams on the Mississippi's banks. "Might be," Tom says, his voice easy, like he's bartering for apples back in Hannibal. "Might be looking for a fella. Sharp dresser, smells like a flower shop." The boy's knife pauses, and his eyes flicker, weighing them. "Lots of fellas in Paris," he says, blowing a plume of smoke that swirls into the rain. "But one like that, he doesn't like being found." Huck's chuckle is low, almost a growl. "Ain't asking him to tea," he says, leaning closer, his shadow falling over the boy. "Just want to know where he's headed." The boy shrugs, but his fingers tighten on the knife, a tell as clear as a poker player's blink. "Try the Marais," he says finally, jerking his chin toward the east. "Or don't. He'll know you're coming either way." Tom tosses the boy a coin, a franc that glints as it spins through the air. The boy catches it without looking, his grin sharp as his blade. "Bonny chance," he calls as they turn away, the words dripping with mockery. The rain falls harder now, a steady drum that muffles the city's sounds, and Tom feels the weight of the boy's words settle in his bones. Lupin, if he's out there, isn't just a thief. He's a spider, spinning webs they're already tangled in. What would you have done in their place? Trusted a street rat's word or turned back, knowing the game was rigged? They head toward the Marais, the city unfolding around them like a tattered map. The streets widen, lined with houses whose facades are grand but peeling, their paint flaking like old skin. The air carries the warm, yeasty scent of bread from a bakery stirring to life, its ovens glowing faintly through fogged windows. The taste of coal dust lingers on their tongues, a reminder of the factories that never sleep, their smoke staining the sky. The sound of a street singer drifts from a corner, her voice thin but haunting, singing of lost love and forgotten wars. Huck steps slow, his head tilting toward the song, and Tom nudges him, half smiling. "Ain't got time for serenades," he says, but his voice is soft, touched by the same ache. The Marais is a different beast, its streets alive with the flicker of gas lamps and the murmur of late-night revellers spilling from cafes. The air smells of wine and perfume, a stark contrast to the alley's damp decay. But the hardship is here too, in the hollow eyes of a beggar curled in a doorway, in the patched coats of men hustling for a last drink. Tom's hand brushes the crumpled letter in his pocket, its ink a talisman against doubt. The sapphire of the Duchess, locked in the Comte de Vigny's safe, feels closer now, but so does the shadow of their rival. Huck's eyes scan the crowd, catching on a man in a silk cravat, his laughter too loud, his gestures too practiced. "That him," Huck mutters, but Tom shakes his head. Lupin wouldn't be so obvious. Not in a city that's his stage. They find a cafe tucked beneath an awning. Its tables wet but empty. The chairs tipped against the wall. The owner, a man with a moustache like a walrus's, grumbles but serves them coffee, its steam rising like a prayer in the cold air. The drink is bitter, scalding their tongues, but it sharpens their minds, chasing away the fog of the long night. Tom spreads the map on the table, its edges curling in the damp, and traces a path from the Marais to the Comte's mansion. "We need eyes inside," he says, voice low. "Someone who knows the house, the guards, the locks." Huck sips his coffee, wincing at the taste. "And someone who ain't Lupin's," he adds, his eyes flicking to the street, where a carriage rattles past, its curtains drawn tight. The cafe's warmth seeps into their bones, a brief respite from the rain-soaked streets. The air smells of roasted beans and damp wool, the latter rising from their coats as they dry. The sound of a fiddle drifts from inside, slow and mournful, and Tom's fingers tap the table, restless. He's thinking of the woman they saw at the mansion's gate, her sharp eyes and purposeful stride. "She's a piece of this," he says, almost to himself. "Maybe a maid, maybe more." Huck's grin returns, crooked and knowing. "Ain't never just a maid in a place like that," he says, and Tom nods, the plan shifting in his mind like a river carving a new course. They finish their coffee, the cups clinking softly as they set them down, and step back into the night. The rain has eased, leaving the air cool and clean, the cobblestones glistening like polished glass. The Marais hums around them, its streets a tapestry of light and shadow, and Tom feels the city's pulse again, steady and unyielding. They move toward the Seine, the river's scent growing stronger, its waters a mirror for the moon's pale face. The mansion waits, its secrets locked behind iron and stone, but so does Lupin, his presence a weight they can't shake. As they cross a bridge, the planks creaking under their boots, a figure steps from the shadows. Not the boy, not the woman, but a man, his coat dark and tailored, his face half lit by a match as he lights a cigarette. The flame flares, revealing eyes that are bright, amused, and far too knowing. "Messieurs," he says, his voice smooth as silk, "Paris is no place for amateurs." The match dies, and the darkness claims him again, but his laughter lingers, soft and sharp, like a blade drawn across velvet. Tom's heart pounds, his hand tight on his knife, but Huck's touch on his arm steadies him. They don't speak, not yet, but their eyes meet, a silent vow forged in years of friendship. The river murmurs below, its voice a lullaby for a city that never sleeps, and they step forward, drawn deeper into the sapphire gleaming in their minds like a star in the night. The man's laughter, soft as a blade's whisper, lingers in the air, curling around Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn like smoke from his cigarette. The Seine murmurs below the bridge, its waters catching the moon's fractured glow, and the rain-soaked planks creak beneath their boots. Tom's grip on his knife tightens, the handle's worn wood a steady anchor against the stranger's silken voice. Huck's eyes, narrow and wary, fix on the spot where the man stands, half shrouded in shadow, his coat gleaming with dampness. "Amateurs," he says, Huck mutters, voice low, the words tasting of bitter coffee and defiance. Tom's jaw sets, his heart pounding not with fear but with the thrill of a challenge laid bare. Can you imagine that moment? The weight of a stranger's words, sharp as a dart in a city where every shadow holds a wager. The man steps closer, his boots silent on the wet wood, and the match he'd lit flares again, casting a brief glow across his face. His eyes are bright, not with malice, but with a knowing amusement, as if he's read their story from cover to cover. "Paris is a chessboard, messieurs," he says, his French accent polished but warm, like a fireside tale. "And you're playing without knowing the pieces." He exhales, the cigarette smoke twisting inward, carrying the faint scent of cloves that mingles with the river's muddy tang. Tom's mind races, the crumpled letter in his pocket burning against his thigh. A man who steals from thieves. This must be Arsène Lupin, though the name remains unspoken, a secret the night holds close. Huck shifts, his hand brushing the rough wool of his coat, and leans forward, his grin sharp but guarded. "We ain't here for games," he says, his voice steady despite the damp chill seeping into his bones. "We're after what's owed." The man's smile widens, a flash of teeth in the moonlight, and he tilts his head, studying them as a painter might a canvas. "Owed," he repeats, the word soft but weighted, like a coin dropped into still water. "In Paris, nothing is owed. Everything is taken." He flicks the cigarette into the Seine, its ember hissing as it dies, and the air shifts, cooler now, laced with the waxen sweetness of candles from a distant chapel. Tom steps forward, his boots splashing in a puddle, the sound sharp in the quiet. "You know what we're after," he says, his voice low but firm, the old Tom Sawyer swagger tempered by years of hard lessons. "The sapphire, Comte de Vigny's prize." The man's laughter returns, softer this time, a melody that dances with the river's rhythm. "Bold," he says, "but reckless. The Comte's safe is a fortress, and I'm not the only one with eyes on it." His words hang in the air, heavy with implication, and Tom feels a prickle at the back of his neck. The woman at the mansion's gate, the boy in the plaza, the city itself, all pieces in a game they're only beginning to understand. Huck's eyes flick to Tom, a silent question. But Tom's focus is on the man, whose silhouette seems to blur at the edges, as if he's part of the fog rolling off the river. "You're Lupin, ain't you?" Tom asks, the name slipping out like a dare. The man's smile doesn't falter, but his eyes sharpen, a glint like a blade catching light. "Names are costumes," he says, his voice a caress. "Wear them lightly, or they'll weigh you down." He steps back, the shadows swallowing him, and his voice drifts back, faint but clear. "The Marais tomorrow night. Café des Ombres. Come alone, or not at all." The silence that follows is thick, broken only by the river's soft lapping and the distant toll of a bell. Huck spits into the Seine, his breath clouding in the cold air. "He's playing us," he says, but there's a spark in his eyes, the same thrill that drove them to rafts and caves as boys. Tom nods, his mind already turning, mapping the Marais, the café, the man's words. "Maybe," he says, "but he's got something we need, a way in or a way around." The air tastes of salt and iron, the city's pulse steady beneath their feet, and they turn from the bridge, their boots echoing as they move back toward the Marais. The streets are quieter now, the rain a faint drizzle that slicks their hair and coats. The air carries the warm, yeasty scent of bread from an early bakery, its ovens glowing like embers in the dawn's first light. The cobblestones are uneven, worn smooth by centuries of boots, and Tom's steps are steady, his mind fixed on the sapphire, a jewel that could buy a steamboat, a new life, a chance to outrun the Mississippi's ghosts. Huck's hand brushes his shoulder, a wordless check-in, and Tom's grin is faint but real. They're in this together, against a city that's both stage and snare. The Marais unfolds around them, its grand houses peeling at the edges, their windows dark but for the occasional flicker of candlelight. The air smells of wine and damp plaster, a reminder of the district faded glory, and the sound of a street sweeper's broom rasps softly, a rhythm like a heartbeat. They pass a beggar curled in a doorway, his breath ragged, his hands clutching a tattered blanket. Paris is no kinder than Hannibal, Tom thinks, its beauty a mask for the same old struggle. What would you have felt walking these streets? The pull of ambition, yes, but also the weight of survival, every step a gamble against the odds. They find their lodging house in the Latin Quarter, the landlady's gin-soaked scowl greeting them as they climb the creaking stairs. The room is as they left it, damp, dusty, the single window rattling in its frame. The air tastes of old tobacco and mildew, but it's a roof, and in Paris that's enough. Tom spreads the map on the table, its ink smudged but readable, and traces a path to the Café des Ombres. "Tomorrow night," he says, voice low, "we will meet him." Or we don't. Huck lights a cigarette, the match flaring briefly, and leans back, his boots propped on a chair. "Alone," he says, Huck mutters, exhaling smoke. "Ain't never a good sign." Tom's fingers tap the map, restless, his mind weaving plans like a spider's web. "We go together," he says finally. "He expects one, he gets two, that's our edge." Huck's grin returns, crooked and warm, and the room feels smaller, warmer, as if their friendship could hold back the city's chill. The rain taps the window, a soft lullaby, and the gas lamps outside cast long, wavering shadows across the floor. Can you picture it? Two men, bound by years of mischief and loyalty, plotting against a phantom in a city that sings of both glory and ruin. The night stretches on, but sleep is far off. Tom lies on the creaking bed, his eyes tracing cracks in the ceiling, his thoughts on the woman at the mansion's gate. Her sharp eyes, her purposeful stride. She's no servant, he's sure of it, but what is she? A thief, like them? A pawn in Lupin's game? Huck's breathing slows, a soft rasp in the dark, and Tom feels the weight of their journey. From riverbanks to Paris's heart, from boys to men, from dreams to this moment, where a sapphire waits like a star they might never reach. The air is cool, damp against his skin, and the faint taste of coal lingers, a reminder of the city's endless churn. Morning comes slowly, the sky grey and heavy, the streets stirring with the clatter of carts and the cries of vendors. Tom and Huck rise, their coats still damp, their resolve unbroken. The Café des Ombres waits, a name that feels like a riddle, and with it, the man who might be Lupin, or might be something else entirely. They step into the day, the cobblestones slick beneath their boots, the air thick with the scent of roasted chestnuts, and the promise of a game about to unfold. The promise of a game unfolds in the grey dawn, its light seeping through the Marais' narrow streets like ink spreading on wet paper. Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn move with purpose, their boots scuffing softly against cobblestone still slick from the night's rain. The air carries the warm yeasty scent of bread from a nearby bakery, mingling with the sharp tang of coal smoke that never quite leaves Paris's breath. Tom's hand brushes the crumpled letter in his pocket, its ink a faint pulse against his thigh, while Huck's eyes scan the waking city, catching the flicker of a lamplighter snuffing out the last of the gas lamps. The man's words from the bridge, Café des Ombres, come alone, echo in their minds, a challenge wrapped in velvet, and the sapphire gleams in their thoughts, a star just out of reach. Can you feel the weight of that moment? The pull of a city that promises everything but trusts no one. The Marais hum with early life, its streets stirring with vendors hauling carts of wilted greens and fish, their voices sharp but melodic, cutting through the morning's haze. The air tastes of damp stone and the faint sweetness of apples from a passing peddler's basket. Her shawl frayed at the edges, her hands rough from years of labour. This is not the Paris of gilded carriages or silk gowns, but a city of grit and survival, where every coin is earned through hustle or guile. Tom's coat, heavy with damp, clings to his shoulders, and Huck's fingers twitch, itching for the open river but finding only stone and shadow. They move past a butcher's shop, the metallic scent of blood mingling with the sawdust scattered on the floor, and Huck's stomach rumbles, a reminder of meals missed and nights spent planning. The Café des Ombres lies tucked between two sagging buildings, its sign faded, the letters curling like smoke. The windows are fogged, their glass streaked with rain, and the air outside smells of roasted coffee and old wine, a faint sourness lingering from spilled bottles in the alley. Tom pauses at the door, his hand resting on the worn brass handle, cool and smooth under his palm. Huck leans close, his voice low, barely louder than the creak of a passing cart. "He said come alone," he murmurs, his breath clouding in the chill. Tom's grin is quick, a flash of the boy who once conned a town into painting a fence. "He doesn't know us," he says, voice soft but steady. "We don't play by nobody's rules but ours." They step inside, the door creaking on rusty hinges, and the cafe unfolds around them, dim and warm, like a cave lit by embers. The air is thick with the scent of tobacco and buttery pastries, the latter stacked on a counter where a barmaid wipes glasses with a rag that's seen better days. The tables are scarred, their wood dark with age, and the chairs creak under the weight of men in patched coats and women with tired eyes. The sound of a fiddle drifts from a corner, slow and mournful, its notes weaving through the murmur of voices, French, sharp and rapid, with the occasional growl of a foreign tongue. Tom's eyes scan the room, catching on a man in the far corner, his back to the wall, a newspaper folded neatly beside a cup of black coffee. His coat is tailored, his scarf loose but deliberate, and the faint scent of lavender clings to the air around him. Huck nudges Tom, his nod subtle, and they take a table near the centre, close enough to watch but far enough to breathe. The barmaid brings them coffee, its steam curling upward, bitter and scalding on their tongues. The cups are chipped, the saucers stained, but the warmth seeps into their hands, chasing away the morning's chill. Tom's fingers tap the table, restless, his mind turning over the man's words from the bridge. "He's here," he says, voice low, his eyes flicking to the man in the corner. Huck sips his coffee, wincing at the taste, and leans back, his chair creaking. "Or he ain't," he says, his grin crooked. Could be another of his tricks. The man in the corner doesn't look up, but his fingers pause on the newspaper, a subtle shift that Tom catches like a hawk spotting a ripple in the river. The air grows heavier, the fiddle's notes slowing, and the cafe feels smaller, as if the walls are listening. What would you have done in their place? Sat and waited, or walked to that corner, daring the shadow to show its face? Tom's hand brushes the knife in his pocket, not out of fear but habit, a relic of boyhood sharpened by time. Huck's eyes are steady, his breathing slow, the same calm he carried when they drifted down the Mississippi, dodging steamboats and dreams. The man folds his newspaper, deliberate and slow, and rises, his movements fluid, like water over stone. He crosses the room, his boots silent on the worn floor, and stops at their table, his shadow falling across the chipped cups. "Messieurs," he says, his voice smooth as the Seine at midnight. "You don't follow instructions well." The lavender scent is stronger now, laced with a hint of leather, and his eyes, bright, amused, dangerous, hold theirs without blinking. Tom's heart quickens, but his voice is steady. "We ain't much for rules," he says, leaning back, his grin a challenge. "You got a name, or you just the ghost everybody's whispering about?" The man's smile is a blade, sharp but warm, and he pulls out a chair, sitting without invitation. "Names are fleeting," he says, his fingers brushing the rim of his coffee cup. "But you may call me Arsène, if it suits you." The name lands like a pebble in a pond, rippling through the air, and Huck's fingers tighten on his cup, his knuckles pale. "Lupin," he says, not a question but a confirmation, and the man's smile widens, a flicker of delight in his eyes. "You're bold," he says, "but Paris eats bald men for breakfast. The sapphire you seek is not just a jewel, it's a key, and the Comte's mansion is a lock with many teeth." Tom's mind races, piecing together the man's words. A key? To what? Wealth? Yes. But something more? Something Lupin wants as badly as they do. The air tastes of coffee and anticipation, the fiddle's notes fading into a soft hum, and the cafe's warmth presses close, a cocoon against the city's chill. Huck leans forward, his voice low, rough with the river's edge. "You're after it too," he says. "Why tell us? Why not take it and be done?" Lupin's laughter is soft, a melody that dances with the morning light filtering through the fogged windows. "Because, mon ami," he says, "a game is no fun without players." The barmaid passes, her rag trailing a faint scent of vinegar, and the sound of a cart rattling outside pulls Tom's eyes to the window. The street is alive now, vendors shouting, their voices a chorus of hunger and hustle. The Marais is no different from the Mississippi's banks, Tom thinks, a place where dreams are bartered for bread, where every smile hides a scheme. Lupin leans back, his scarf slipping to reveal a glimpse of a silk cravat, and his voice drops, soft as the rain that started again outside. "The Comte's safe is no simple box," he says. "It's German, forged by men who build vaults for kings. But there's a woman, the one you saw at the gate. She knows its secrets." Huck's eyes narrow, his mind on the woman with the sharp eyes and hooded cloak. "She yours?" he asks, blunt as a hammer, and Lupin's laugh returns, warm but guarded. "No one belongs to anyone in Paris," he says, "but she's a player like us. Find her, and you find the safe. Cross her, and you lose more than the sapphire." The air shifts, cooler now, the cafe's warmth fading as the door swings open, letting in a gust of damp air and the scent of wet wool. Lupin rises, his movements a dance, and tosses a coin onto the table, its clink sharp in the quiet. "Tomorrow night," he says, "the mansion. Be there or don't, but choose wisely." He's gone before they can answer, slipping through the door like a shadow through fog, leaving only the scent of lavender and the weight of his words. Tom's fingers tap the table, restless, his mind spinning with plans and pitfalls. Huck drains his coffee, the bitter dregs grounding him, and leans back, his eyes on the empty chair. "He's trouble," he says, voice soft but certain. "But he's right about one thing. We need that woman." Tom nods, the map in his pocket a promise, the sapphire a dream that burns brighter with every step. The cafe hums around them, the fiddle starting again, its notes a lullaby for a city that never sleeps, and they rise, their boots heavy on the floor, ready to chase the next thread in Paris's tangled web. The next thread in Paris's tangled web pulls Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn through the Café des Ombres' creaking door, back into the Marais' damp embrace. The air outside is sharp, laced with the nutty warmth of roasted chestnuts from a vendor's cart, its smoke curling upward like a prayer in the morning light. Their boots scuff against cobblestones, slick and uneven, each step a soft echo in the waking city. Tom's mind churns, Lupin's words, she knows its secrets, weaving through his thoughts like the Seine through stone. Huck's hand brushes his coat, fingers twitching with the restless energy of a man who trusts rivers more than streets. The sapphire, a jewel that could rewrite their past, burns in their minds. But the woman at the mansion's gate, her sharp eyes hidden by a hood, is the key they must find. Can you sense it? The city's pulse, quickening with each step as if it knows the game is shifting. The Marais hum around them, its streets alive with the clatter of carts and the cries of vendors hawking bread and fish, their voices rough but rhythmic, a chorus of survival. The air tastes of coal dust and the faint sweetness of spilled wine seeping from a tavern's cracked barrels. This is Paris, raw and unpolished, where dreams are stitched into threadbare coats and broken in the workhouses along the river. Tom's coat, heavy with damp, clings to his shoulders, and Huck's eyes scan the crowd, catching on a boy darting through the throng, his fingers nimble as he lifts a coin from a distracted merchant. Huck's lips twitch. He knows that dance too well, a memory of river banks and boyhood scams. They move toward the Ile de la Cité, where the Comte de Vigny's mansion looms, its iron gates a silent challenge. The air grows cooler as they near the Seine, its muddy scent mingling with the waxen sweetness of candles, drifting from Notre Dame's open doors. The cathedral spires pierce the fog, a reminder of a city that worships both God and gold. Tom's hand rests on the knife in his pocket, its handle worn smooth by years of restless fingers, while Huck chews a matchstick, his grin faint but steady. "She ain't going to be easy to find," Huck murmurs, his voice soft as the river's lapping. Tom nods, his eyes on the bridge ahead, its planks slick with rain. "Lupin knows her," he says, voice low. "That's a start." The bridge creaks under their boots, the Seine whispering below, its waters catching the dawn's pale glow. The city shifts, its rhythm subtle but alive, and Tom feels it in his chest. A pulse that's both foreign and familiar, like the Mississippi's current under a raft. They pause at the bridge's end, the mansion's silhouette visible through the fog, its walls high and spiked, a fortress guarding secrets. The woman's image lingers in Tom's mind, her cloaked figure, the key in her hand, the glance that held no fear. Huck leans against the railing, the wood damp and splintered under his palms, and spits the matchstick into the river. "She's no maid," he says, his voice rough with certainty. "Not with eyes like that." Tom's grin is quick. A flash of the boy who once dreamed of treasuring caves. "Maybe she's like us," he says, "chasing something bigger than herself." The air tastes of salt and iron, the city's breath heavy with industry and ambition, and they move on, their steps steady despite the damp chill seeping into their bones. The streets narrow as they approach the mansion, the houses leaning close, their shutters sagging like tired eyes. The air smells of wet plaster and lavender water, the latter splashed by a passing maid to mask the stench of a gutter. What would you have felt standing in their place? The thrill of the hunt, yes, but also the weight of a city that watches its shadows deeper than any river's depths. They slip into an alley beside the mansion, its walls cold and slick under their hands. The fog thickens here, a veil that muffles the city's sounds, the clatter of hooves, the distant wail of a violin. The air is dense, carrying the faint metallic tang of rust from a drainpipe snaking down the stone. Tom crouches, his eyes tracing the mansion's perimeter, counting windows, noting the flicker of candlelight in an upper room. Huck's breath clouds in the chill, his fingers brushing the rough wool of his coat. "Guards?" he whispers, voice barely louder than the fog's soft hum. Tom shakes his head, his gaze fixed on a side gate, its iron bars rusted but sturdy. "Not here," he says, "not yet." The gate creaks faintly, a sound that sets Tom's heart racing, and a figure steps from the shadows. Not a guard, but her, the woman from the night before. Her cloak is dark, heavy with damp, and her hood casts her face in shadow, but her eyes catch the faint light, sharp and unyielding. She moves with purpose, a key glinting in her hand, and pauses, her gaze sweeping the alley. Tom's breath catches, his hand tightening on Huck's arm, and they press deeper into the shadows, the cold stone biting through their coats. The air smells of wax and earth, a strange mix that clings to her as she passes, her boots silent on the wet cobblestones. Huck's voice is a whisper, rough but steady. "She's heading somewhere," he says, his eyes tracking her as she moves toward a narrow street beyond the alley. Tom nods, his mind racing. Lupin's words, the sapphire, the safe, all tied to this woman whose name they don't know. "We follow," he says, voice low, the old thrill of adventure sparking in his chest. They slip from the alley, keeping their distance, their boots soft on the stones. The city wraps around them, its fog a cloak, its sounds a lullaby. The creak of a cart, the soft toll of a bell, the murmur of voices from a tavern waking early. The woman moves quickly, her cloak a dark ripple in the fog, and Tom feels the weight of Paris's gaze, its streets a maze that could swallow them whole. The air tastes of damp wool and anticipation, the Seine's scent fading as they weave deeper into the city's heart. They pass a market stirring to life, its stalls heavy with oysters and greens, the brenny scent sharp against the morning's chill. A vendor's cry cuts through the fog, harsh but alive, and Huck's eyes flicker, catching on a boy no older than 10, his fingers darting into a shopper's pocket. The boy meets Huck's gaze, a grin flashing before he vanishes into the crowd, and Huck's chuckle is soft, a memory of their own boyhood mischief. The woman turns into a courtyard, its flagstones cracked and slick, a single lantern casting a golden glow that barely reaches the edges. The air here smells of wood smoke and stale wine, the remnants of some forgotten gathering, and Tom's heart quickens as she pauses, her hand brushing a door set into the stone. Huck's hand rests on Tom's shoulder, a silent warning, and they wait. The fog cool against their skin, the city's pulse steady in their ears. Can you imagine it? The tension of that moment, chasing a shadow who holds the key to everything, in a city that guards its secrets like a lover's heart. She knocks, a soft rhythm that echoes in the quiet, and the door opens, revealing a man in a worn coat, his face half lit by the lantern. His voice is low, too faint to catch, but her reply carries, sharp and clear, in French that's polished but urgent. Tom strains to hear, his schoolboy French rusty but enough to catch fragments. Safe, tonight, Comte. Huck's eyes narrow, his mind on the sapphire, the mansion. The game Lupin's playing. The door closes, the woman and the man gone, and the courtyard falls silent, the lantern's flames stuttering in the damp air. Tom's breath clouds as he leans close to Huck, his voice barely a whisper. "She's planning something," he says, his grin faint but fierce. "And it ain't just the sapphire." Huck nods, his matchstick back between his teeth, his eyes on the door. "We need her," he says, voice rough with the river's edge. "Or we need what she knows." The air tastes of ashen promise, the city's rhythm pulling them forward, and they step from the courtyard, the fog parting like a curtain, ready to weave the next thread in a tale that's only begun. The tale weaves tighter as Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn slip from the courtyard, the fog parting around them like a curtain drawn by unseen hands. The air is cool, heavy with the scent of damp earth and the faint, acrid bite of charcoal from a brazier smouldering in a nearby alley. Their boots whisper against the cobblestones, slick and uneven, each step a pulse in the city's waking rhythm. Tom's mind hums with the woman's words, "Safe, tonight, Comte," her voice sharp in his memory, a thread leading deeper into Paris's labyrinth. Huck's eyes, sharp as a riverhawk's, scan the shadows, catching the flicker of a lantern swinging in the breeze. The sapphire, a jewel that could rewrite their lives, glimmers in their thoughts, but the woman's secrets and Lupin's shadow pull them forward like the Seine's relentless current. Can you feel it? The city's breath, alive with whispers, as two men chase a dream through its veins. The Marais stirs around them, its streets filling with the clatter of carts and the cries of vendors, their voices rough but melodic, hawking oysters and wilted greens. The air tastes of briny shellfish and the faint sweetness of roasted chestnuts. There's smoke curling upward from a cart where an old man tends his coals, his hands gnarled from years of labour. This is not the Paris of poets or painters, but a city of grit and guile, where survival is a daily wager against hunger and cold. Tom's coat, patched and heavy with damp, brushes against a wall, its plaster flaking like old skin. Huck chews a fresh matchstick, his grin faint but steady, a relic of boyhood sharpened by time. They move with purpose, their steps soft but sure, drawn toward the mansion where the woman's key promises answers. The fog things as they near the Ile de la Cité, the Seine's muddy scent growing stronger, mingling with the waxen sweetness of candles drifting from a chapel's open door. Notre Dame looms through the haze, its spires a silent witness to the city's sins and schemes. Tom's hand rests on the knife in his pocket, its handle worn smooth by restless fingers, while Huck's eyes flicker to a boy no older than 12, darting through the crowd with nimble hands, lifting a coin from a distracted merchant. The boy's grin, quick and knowing, mirrors Huck's own, and he chuckles softly, the sound warm in the chill air. "Same game, different river," he murmurs, his voice low, rough with the Mississippi's edge. Tom nods, his mind on the woman, her cloaked figure, her urgent words, the key that glinted in her hand. "She's no pawn," he says, voice soft but certain. "She's playing her own hand, same as Lupin." The air tastes of salt and iron, the city's pulse steady beneath their boots, and they pause at a corner, the mansion's silhouette visible through the fog. Its iron gates gleam faintly, twisted into patterns that belie their strength, and the walls rise high, spiked like the teeth of a trap. Huck leans against a lamppost, its flame long snuffed, and spits the matchstick into the gutter. "We need her," he says, his eyes on the mansion. "Or we need what she's got." Tom's grin is quick, a spark of the boy who once conned a town into painting a fence. "We'll get both," he says, his voice steady despite the damp chill seeping into his bones. They slip into an alley beside the mansion, its walls cold and slick under their palms, the fog muffling the city's sounds. The creak of a cart, the distant wail of a violin. The air is dense, carrying the metallic tang of rust from a drainpipe snaking down the stone. Tom crouches, his eyes tracing the mansion's perimeter, counting windows, noting the flicker of candlelight in an upper room. Huck's breath clouds in the chill, his fingers brushing the rough wool of his coat. "Guards," he whispers, his voice a thread in the fog's soft weave. Tom shakes his head, his gaze fixed on a side gate, its bars rusted but sturdy. "Not yet," he says, his mind turning over plans like a river smoothing stones. The woman's meeting in the courtyard. Her words about the safe suggest a heist tonight. But whose? Hers, Lupin's, or their own? The air smells of wet plaster and lavender water, the latter splashed by a passing maid to mask the gutter's stench. What would you have done, standing in their place? Followed a stranger's shadow or turned back, knowing the city's traps are as deep as its dreams? They move along the alley, keeping low, their boots silent on the damp stones. The fog presses close, a veil that softens the world's edges, and Tom feels the city's gaze, its streets a maze that could swallow them whole. Huck's hand rests on his shoulder, a wordless check-in, and Tom nods, his grin faint but real. They're in this together, against a city that's both stage and snare. The alley opens into a small plaza, its flagstones cracked and slick, a single lantern casting a golden glow that barely reaches the edges. The air here smells of wood smoke and stale wine, the remnants of some forgotten gathering, and Tom's heart quickens as he spots a figure at the plaza's edge. Not the woman, but a man, his coat dark and worn, his face half lit by the lantern. The man's eyes meet theirs, sharp and unyielding, and he steps forward, his boots scuffing the stones. "You're late," he says, his French rough but clear, laced with the street's cadence. Tom's hand tightens on his knife, but his voice is easy, like he's bartering for apples back in Hannibal. "Didn't know we were expected," he says, his grin a challenge. Huck leans closer, his shadow falling over the man, and his voice is low, rough with suspicion. "Who sent you?" The man's lips twitch, a smile that doesn't reach his eyes, and he pulls a folded paper from his coat, its edges damp but intact. "She did," he says, tossing it to Tom. "Says you're either useful or dead." Tom catches the paper, his fingers brushing its rough surface, and unfolds it under the lantern's glow. The handwriting is sharp, precise, in French that's polished but urgent. "Meet me at the chapel, midnight. Bring no one." The air tastes of ash and anticipation, the city's rhythm pulling them forward, and Tom's eyes meet Huck's, a silent vow forged in years of friendship. "She's calling the shots," he says, voice low, his mind spinning with plans and pitfalls. Huck's chuckle is soft, warm in the cold night. "Ain't that always the way?" he says, his matchstick back between his teeth. The man steps back, his shadow merging with the fog, and his voice drifts back, faint but clear. "Don't be late again," he says, and he's gone, leaving only the echo of his boots and the weight of the note in Tom's hand. The fog thickens, a cocoon around them, and the air smells of wax and earth, a strange mix that clings to the plaza's stones. They move toward the chapel mentioned in the note, its spire visible through the haze, a beacon in the city's labyrinth. The streets narrow, the houses leaning close, their shutters sagging like tired eyes. The air carries the warm, yeasty scent of bread from a bakery stirring to life, its ovens glowing faintly through fogged windows. The chapel lies tucked between two crumbling buildings, its door weathered but solid, the air around it heavy with the scent of incense and damp wood. The sound of a bell tolls softly, marking the hour, noon perhaps or later, and Tom feels the city's pulse, steady and unyielding. Huck pauses at the door, his hand resting on the worn handle, cool and smooth under his palm. "Midnight's a long wait," he murmurs, his voice soft as the fog's hum. Tom nods, his eyes on the chapel's stained glass, its colours muted by the grey light. We scout it now, he says, and we plan. They step inside, the door creaking on rusty hinges, and the chapel unfolds around them, dim and warm, like a cave lit by candles. The air is thick with the scent of wax and old books, the pews scarred with age, their wood dark and smooth. The sound of their boots echoes softly, mingling with the faint murmur of a prayer from a woman in a shawl, her head bowed at the altar. Tom's eyes scan the space, noting the side door, the narrow windows, the shadows that pool in the corners. Huck's fingers brush the back of a pew, his mind on the woman, the note, the sapphire. She's got a plan, he says, voice low, rough with certainty. And we're either in it or against it. Tom's grin is faint but fierce, a spark of the boy who once dreamed of treasure in caves. We're in, he says, but on our terms. The air tastes of incense and anticipation, the chapel's warmth pressing close, a cocoon against the city's chill. They slip out, the fog wrapping around them once more, and the streets hum with life, vendors shouting, their voices a chorus of hunger and hustle. The sapphire waits, a star in their journey's heart, but so does the woman and Lupin, and a city that twists every thread into its own design, ready to pull them deeper into the night. The night deepens its hold, drawing Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn through Paris's fog-draped streets, the city's secrets pulling them like threads in a tapestry yet to be woven. The air is cool, heavy with the scent of damp stone and the faint sweet musk of incense lingering from the chapel they'd scouted hours before. Their boots tread softly on the cobblestones, each step a whisper against the city's restless hum. Tom's fingers brush the note in his pocket, its sharp script. Meet me at the chapel, midnight. A pulse against his skin, while Huck's eyes scan the shadows, catching the flicker of a gas lamp's flame dancing in the breeze. The woman's command and Lupin's shadow weave through their thoughts, the sapphire of a distant star guiding them toward a meeting that could unravel everything. Can you sense the stillness of that moment, the way the city holds its breath, as if it knows the hour of reckoning draws near? The Marais fades behind them, its vendors and carts replaced by the quieter rhythm of the Ile de la Cité, where the Seine murmurs softly, its waters catching the moon's pale glow. The air tastes of salt and iron, a reminder of the river's endless churn, and the faint clatter of a distant carriage echoes like a memory. Tom's coat, patched and damp, clings to his shoulders, the chill seeping into his bones, but his mind is sharp, turning over the woman's note, her urgent words in the courtyard, the man who called them late. Huck chews a matchstick, his grin faint but steady, a spark of the boy who once drifted down the Mississippi with nothing but a raft and a dream. Midnight's a bad hour for meeting strangers, he murmurs, his voice low, rough with the river's edge. Tom nods, his hand resting on the knife in his pocket, its handle worn smooth by years of restless fingers. Bad for them too, he says, his voice soft but fierce, a flicker of the boy who conned a town into painting a fence. The chapel lies ahead, its weathered door tucked between crumbling stone, the air around it thick with the scent of wax and old wood. The sound of a bell tolls faintly, marking the hour, 11 perhaps, or closer to midnight, and the fog presses close, a veil that softens the world's edges. They pause at the corner, the chapel's stained glass glinting dully in the moonlight, and Huck leans against a wall, its plaster flaking under his palm. We go in blind, he says, his eyes on the door. Or we wait. Tom's grin is quick, a spark of mischief tempered by time. We wait, he says, but we see. They slip into an alley beside the chapel, its walls cold and slick, the fog muffling the city's sounds, the creak of a shutter, the soft wail of a violin from a distant tavern. The air is dense, carrying the metallic tang of rust from a drainpipe snaking down the stone. Tom crouches, his eyes tracing the chapel's silhouette, noting the side door, the narrow windows, the shadows that pool like ink in the corners. Huck's breath clouds in the chill, his fingers brushing the rough wool of his coat. "She'll come alone," he whispers, his voice a thread in the fog's soft weave. "Or she won't." The minutes stretch, the city's pulse slow and steady, and Tom feels the weight of their journey, from riverbanks to Paris's heart, from boys to men, from dreams to this moment, where a woman's key could unlock more than a safe. The air smells of damp earth and lavender water, the latter splashed by a passing maid hours before, its sweetness a faint echo in the night. What would you have felt standing in their place? The thrill of the unknown, yes, but also the weight of a city that watches its secrets deeper than any cave they'd ever explored. The chapel's bell tolls midnight, its sound low and resonant, vibrating through the fog. The door creaks open, and she steps out. The woman, her cloak dark and heavy, her hood casting her face in shadow. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, sweep the alley, and Tom's breath catches, his hand tightening on Huck's arm. They press deeper into the shadows, the cold stone biting through their coats, and the air shifts, carrying the faint scent of wax and leather clinging to her. She moves with purpose, her boots silent on the cobblestones, and pauses at the alley's mouth, her hand brushing a key that glints in the moonlight. Huck's voice is barely a whisper, rough but steady. "She's expecting someone," he says, his eyes tracking her as she glances toward the street beyond. Tom nods, his mind racing. The note, the man in the courtyard, Lupin's cryptic game. "Maybe us," he says, his voice low, the old thrill of adventure sparking in his chest. They ease forward, keeping their distance, their boots soft on the stones. The fog wraps around them, a cloak against the city's gaze, and the sound of a carriage rattles faintly, its wheels grinding over the broader streets. The woman moves toward the Seine, her cloak a dark ripple in the fog, and Tom feels the city's pulse quicken, its streets a maze that could swallow them whole, the air tastes of damp wool and anticipation, the river's scent growing stronger as they follow. They pass a tavern spilling light and laughter, the warm scent of wine and bread cutting through the chill, and Huck's stomach rumbles, a reminder of meals missed and nights spent planning. The woman pauses at a bridge, its planks slick with damp, and glances over her shoulder, her eyes catching the moonlight for a moment, sharp, searching, unafraid. Tom's heart pounds, his hand on Huck's arm, and they duck behind a stack of crates, their wood splintered and damp under their palms. The air smells of fish and tar, a wharf's legacy, and the Seine murmurs below, its voice a lullaby for a city that never sleeps. Huck's voice is a whisper, rough with suspicion. "She knows we're here," he says, his eyes on her cloaked figure. Tom shakes his head, his grin faint but fierce. "Not yet," he says, "but she will." She crosses the bridge, her steps steady, and they follow, keeping low, their shadows merging with the fog. The city shifts around them, its rhythm alive, and Tom feels it in his chest, a pulse that's both foreign and familiar, like the Mississippi's current under a raft. The woman turns into a narrow street, its houses leaning close, their shutters sagging like tired eyes. The air carries the warm, yeasty scent of bread from a bakery stirring to life, its ovens glowing faintly through fogged windows. She pauses at a door, its wood weathered but solid, and knocks, a soft rhythm that echoes in the quiet. The door opens, revealing a man in a tailored coat, his face half lit by a lantern. His voice is low, too faint to catch, but her reply carries, sharp and clear, in French that's polished but urgent. "The safe is ready," she says, her words slicing through the fog, and Tom's heart quickens, his schoolboy French catching the weight of her intent. Huck's eyes narrow, his mind on the sapphire, the mansion, the game Lupin's playing. The door closes, the woman and the man are gone, and the street falls silent, the lantern's flames stuttering in the damp air. Tom leans close to Huck, his breath clouding in the chill. "Tonight's the night," he says, his voice barely a whisper, his grin fierce with the thrill of the chase. "She's moving on the safe and we're going to be there, Huck nods, his matchstick back between his teeth, his eyes on the door. "Lupin, I'll be there too," he says, voice rough with certainty. "And he ain't one to share." The air tastes of ash and promise, the city's rhythm pulling them forward, and they slip from the shadows, the fog parting like a curtain, ready to chase the next thread in a tale that twists ever tighter. The tale twists ever tighter as Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn slip from the shadows, the fog curling around them like a lover's whisper in the Paris night. The air is dense, heavy with the scent of damp wool and the faint acrid bite of coal smoke drifting from a distant chimney. Their boots tread softly on the cobblestones, each step a pulse in the city's restless heart, as they move toward the Comte de Vigny's mansion, where the woman's words, "The safe is ready," echo in their minds. Tom's hand brushes the note in his pocket, its sharp script a talisman against doubt, while Huck's eyes scan the street, catching the flicker of a gas lamp's flame stuttering in the breeze. The sapphire, a jewel that could buy a new life, burns in their thoughts, but the woman's heist and Lupin's shadow pull them deeper into a game where every move is a gamble. Can you feel the tension of that moment? The city's gaze sharp and unyielding, as two men step closer to a prize that could break them. The Ile de la Cité hums softly. Its streets quieter now, the vendors and carts of the Marais replaced by the murmur of the Seine and the occasional clatter of a carriage. The air tastes of salt and iron, the river's breath mingling with the waxen sweetness of candles from a chapel they'd left behind. Tom's coat, patched and heavy with damp, clings to his shoulders, the chill seeping into his bones, but his mind is sharp, weaving plans like a river carving a new course. Huck chews a matchstick, his grin faint but steady, a spark of the boy who once dodged lawmen's lanterns on the Mississippi's banks. "She's moving tonight," Huck murmurs, his voice low, rough with the river's edge, "and we ain't got much time." Tom nods, his hand resting on the knife in his pocket, its handle worn smooth by years of restless fingers. "We get in first," he says, his voice soft but fierce, a flicker of the boy who once dreamed of treasure in caves. The mansion looms ahead, its iron gates gleaming faintly in the moonlight, twisted into patterns that belie their strength. The walls rise high, spiked like the teeth of a trap, and the air around them smells of wet ivy and polished leather, the latter wafting from a carriage that rumbles past, its curtains drawn tight. They slip into an alley beside the mansion, its walls cold and slick under their palms, the fog muffling the city's sounds, the creak of a shutter, the soft toll of a distant bell. The alley is narrow, its cobblestones uneven, and the air is thick with the metallic tang of rust from a drainpipe snaking down the stone. Tom crouches, his eyes tracing the mansion's perimeter, counting windows, noting the flicker of candlelight in an upper room. Huck leans against the wall, his breath clouding in the chill, his fingers brushing the rough wool of his coat. "Side gates our way," he whispers, his voice a thread in the fog's soft weave. Tom nods, his gaze fixed on the rusted bars they'd scouted earlier, their hinges weak but guarded by shadows. "We need her key," he says, his mind on the woman's cloaked figure, her sharp eyes, her urgent words. The fog presses close, a veil that softens the world's edges, and Tom feels the city's pulse, steady and unyielding, like the Mississippi's current under a raft. Huck's hand rests on his shoulder, a wordless check-in, and Tom's grin is faint but real. The courtyard is small, its flagstones cracked and slick, a single lantern casting a golden glow that barely reaches the edges. The air here smells of wood smoke and stale wine, the remnants of some forgotten gathering, and Tom's heart quickens as he spots a door set into the stone, its wood weathered but solid. Huck's eyes scan the windows above, catching the flicker of candlelight, the shadow of a figure moving within. "Guards?" he whispers, his voice barely louder than the fog's hum. Tom shakes his head, his mind on the woman's key, the safe, the sapphire. "Not here," he says, "but inside." They ease toward the door, their boots soft on the stones, and Tom tests the handle, cool and smooth under his palm. It's locked, but the wire works its magic again, the lock yielding with a faint click. The door creaks open, revealing a dim hallway, its air thick with the scent of polished wood and old books. The sound of their boots echoes softly, mingling with the faint tick of a clock somewhere deep in the house. Tom's eyes adjust to the gloom, catching the glint of brass candlesticks on a table, the shimmer of a mirror reflecting their shadowed forms. Huck's breath is steady, his matchstick back between his teeth, and he nudges Tom, his nod subtle. "Library's that way," he murmurs, recalling the map they'd studied in their lodging house. The hallway stretches before them, its walls lined with portraits whose eyes seem to follow, their gazes heavy with the weight of old wealth. The air tastes of dust and wax, a reminder of a house that's both grand and guarded, and Tom feels the city's pulse, alive within these walls. They move silently, their boots soft on the polished floor, and pause at a door carved with vines, its brass knob gleaming faintly. Tom's hand hovers, his heart pounding, and Huck's voice is a whisper, rough but steady. "This is it," he says, his eyes on the door. "Safe's behind here if Lupin's right." Tom nods, his grin fierce with the thrill of the chase, and turns the knob, the door opening with a soft creak. The library unfolds around them, vast and dim, its air thick with the scent of leather and ink. Rows of books line the walls, their spines glinting in the moonlight streaming through tall windows. The sound of their boots is muffled by a thick rug, its fibres worn but soft, and Tom's eyes scan the room, catching on a panel set into the far wall, its edges slightly misaligned. Huck's hand rests on his shoulder, a silent vow, and they move toward the panel, the air heavy with anticipation. The panel is cool under Tom's fingers, its wood smooth but yielding, and he presses gently, feeling a faint click. The wall shifts, revealing a small alcove, its air stale and cold, and there it is. The safe, its steel gleaming dully in the moonlight. The air tastes of iron and promise, the city's rhythm pulling them forward, and Tom's heart quickens, his mind on the sapphire, the woman, Lupin. Huck's voice is barely a whisper, rough with certainty. "She's comin' for this," he says, his eyes on the safe. And so's he. The sound of footsteps echoes faintly, sharp in the quiet, and Tom's hand tightens on Huck's arm, his breath catching. They slip behind a bookshelf, its wood cool and solid, and the air shifts, carrying the faint scent of lavender and leather. The woman steps into the library, her cloak dark and heavy, her eyes sharp in the moonlight. She moves with purpose, her key glinting in her hand, and pauses at the panel, her gaze sweeping the room. Tom's heart pounds, his mind racing. They're here, in the heart of the heist, with Lupin's shadow looming and a sapphire that could change everything, ready to weave the next thread in a tale that's far from done. The tale weaves its final threads as Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn crouch behind the library's bookshelf, the air thick with the scent of leather and ink, their breaths shallow in the moonlight's pale glow. The woman's cloaked figure stands before the safe, her key glinting like a shard of starlight, her movements precise as she works the lock. The city's pulse, a rhythm of fog and ambition, thrums through the mansion's walls, and Tom's heart pounds, his hand steady on Huck's arm. Huck's eyes, sharp as a river hawk's, track the woman, catching the faint tremble in her fingers, a crack in her polished resolve. The sapphire, a jewel that could rewrite their lives, lies within the safe, but Lupin's shadow looms, a phantom in a game that's reached its crescendo. Can you feel the stillness of that moment, the weight of a city's secrets, poised on the edge of revelation as Paris holds its breath? The library is a world unto itself, its rows of books silent witnesses to the drama unfolding in their shadows. The air tastes of dust and wax, a reminder of wealth hoarded and guarded, and the sound of the woman's key turning in the safe is sharp, a note in the night's quiet melody. Tom's mind races, piecing together the woman's urgency, Lupin's cryptic warnings, the note that led them here. Huck's matchstick, wedged between his teeth, shifts slightly, his grin faint but steady. A spark of the boy who once drifted down the Mississippi with nothing but a raft and a dream. The safe slot clicks, a sound that cuts through the fog, and the woman pauses, her breath clouding in the chill, her eyes sweeping the room. Tom's hand tightens on Huck's arm, his voice barely a whisper, fierce with the thrill of the chase. "She's got it," he says, his gaze fixed on the safe's door, its steel gleaming dully in the moonlight. Huck nods, his eyes narrowing, his mind on Lupin, who could be anywhere, in the shadows, on the roof, or already gone. The air shifts, carrying the faint scent of lavender and leather, and Tom's heart quickens, a prickle at the back of his neck. The woman opens the safe, its hinges silent, and there it is. The sapphire, a jewel the size of a robin's egg, its facets catching the moonlight in a dance of blue fire. The air tastes of iron and promise, the city's rhythm pulling them forward, and Huck's voice is low, rough with certainty. "That's our ticket," he murmurs, his eyes on the gem. The woman's fingers hover over the sapphire, but a soft creak from the library's door freezes her, her eyes sharp and searching. Tom and Huck press deeper into the shadows, the bookshelf's wood cool and solid against their backs, and the air grows heavier, the scent of lavender stronger now. A figure steps into the room. Not a guard, but him, Arsène Lupin, his coat tailored and dark, his scarf loose but deliberate. His eyes, bright and amused, lock onto the woman, and his voice is smooth as the Seine at midnight. "Mademoiselle," he says, his French caress, "you're early, but not alone." The woman's hand drops from the safe, her posture taut, a blade unsheathed. "You're late," she says, her voice sharp but steady, her French polished but urgent, "and uninvited." Lupin's laughter is soft, a melody that dances with the moonlight, and he steps closer, his boots silent on the rug. "Paris invites us all," he says, his eyes flicking to the sapphire, then to the shadows where Tom and Huck hide. Tom's breath catches, his hand on his knife, but Huck's touch steadies him, a silent vow forged in years of friendship. The air smells of wax and tension, the city's pulse quickening, and Tom feels it in his chest, a rhythm that's both foreign and familiar, like the Mississippi's current under a raft. Huck's voice is barely a whisper, rough with suspicion. "He knows we're here," he says, his eyes on Lupin's knowing smile. Tom nods, his mind spinning with plans and pitfalls. The woman steps back, her cloak a dark ripple, and her voice cuts through the quiet. "Take it then," she says, her eyes on Lupin, "but you'll regret it." Lupin's smile widens, a flash of teeth in the moonlight, and he reaches for the sapphire, his fingers deft, a dancer's grace. But the woman moves faster, her key flashing as she slams the safe shut, the lock clicking with finality. "Not tonight," she says, her voice low, fierce with defiance. Lupin's laughter returns, warm but guarded, and he tilts his head, studying her as a painter might a canvas. "Bold," he says, "but reckless. The Comte's guards are closer than you think." The sound of footsteps echoes faintly, sharp in the quiet, and Tom's heart pounds, his mind racing. The woman, the sapphire, Lupin, all tangled in a game they're only beginning to understand. Huck's hand tightens on his arm, his voice a whisper, rough with urgency. "We gotta move," he says, his eyes on the door. Tom nods, his grin fierce, a spark of the boy who once conned a town into painting a fence. "We take it now," he says, "or we lose it." They slip from behind the bookshelf, their boots soft on the rug, and the woman's eyes snap to them, sharp and unyielding. "You," she says, her voice low, her French laced with surprise. Lupin's smile doesn't falter, his eyes bright with delight. "Monsieur," he says, his voice a caress, "you're full of surprises." The air tastes of dust and anticipation, the library's warmth pressing close, a cocoon against the city's chill. Tom steps forward, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "The sapphire's ours," he says, his eyes on the woman, then Lupin. "Step aside, or we make it messy." The woman's laughter is sharp, a blade in the quiet, and she shakes her head. her cloak falling back to reveal a face both fierce and weary. "You're fools," she says, her voice soft but weighted, like a coin dropped into still water. "The sapphire cursed, it's not wealth, it's ruin." Huck's eyes narrow, his matchstick shifting, and his voice is rough, steady with the river's edge. "We'll take our chances," he says, his hand brushing the knife in his pocket. Lupin's hand rests on the safe, his fingers tracing its steel, and his voice is low, warm with amusement. "A curse?" he says. "Or a key to something greater?" The footsteps grow louder, the guard's boots echoing in the hallway, and the air shifts, heavy with the scent of lavender and danger. The woman steps back, her eyes flicking to the door, then to Tom and Huck. "Leave now," she says, her voice urgent. "Or you'll lose more than the jewel." Tom's mind races, the sapphire gleaming in his thoughts. But Huck's touch pulls him back, a silent warning. Lupin's smile is a blade, sharp but warm, and he slips a small tool from his coat, working the safe's lock with a dancer's grace. The lock clicks, the door opens, and the sapphire is in his hand, its blue fire catching the moonlight. The guards burst in, their lanterns flaring, their voices sharp with French commands. The woman vanishes through a side door, her cloak a dark ripple, and Lupin turns, his eyes meeting Tom's for a moment, bright with mischief. "Another time, monsieur," he says, and he's gone, slipping through a window, the fog swallowing him whole. Tom and Huck dive behind the bookshelf, their hearts pounding, the air thick with the scent of wax and fear. The guards search, their lanterns casting long shadows, but the fog and the night are kind, hiding the river rats from Hannibal. The library falls silent, the guards gone, and Tom's breath clouds in the chill, his mind on the sapphire now in Lupin's hands. Huck's voice is low, rough with defiance. "We ain't done," he says, his grin crooked, a spark of the boy who never gave up. Tom nods, his hand brushing the note in his pocket. Its script a promise of another chase. The air tastes of ash and resolve, the city's rhythm pulling them forward, and they slip from the library, the fog parting like a curtain, ready to weave a new tale in a city that never sleeps. What would you have done, dear listener? Chased a phantom through the fog, or let the sapphire's song fade, a dream lost to Paris's endless night? Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn slip from the Comte's mansion, the fog swallowing their shadows as they melt into Paris's restless night. The air is sharp, laced with the damp musk of the Seine and the faint acrid bite of coal smoke curling from a distant chimney. Their boots scuff softly against the cobblestones, each step a quiet defiance against the city that lets Lupin slip through their fingers with the sapphire's blue fire. Tom's hand brushes the knife in his pocket, its handle worn smooth by years of restless fingers, while Huck's eyes scan the street, catching the flicker of a gas lamp's flame dancing in the breeze. Lupin's laughter, soft and mocking, echoes in their minds, a challenge they can't ignore. The woman's warning, it's not wealth, it's ruin, lingers like a bitter aftertaste, but the jewel's promise, a chance to outrun their past, pulls them forward. Can you sense the fire in their hearts? The pulse of a city that offers no rest, as two river rats chase a phantom through its maze. The Ile de la Cité hums with a quiet intensity, its streets empty save for the occasional figure hurrying through the fog, their shawls pulled tight against the chill. The air tastes of salt and iron, the river's breath heavy with the weight of a city that never truly sleeps. Tom's coat, patched and damp, clings to his shoulders, the cold seeping into his bones, but his mind is sharp, turning over Lupin's escape, the woman's words, the guards' lanterns that nearly caught them. Huck chews a fresh matchstick, his grin crooked but fierce, a spark of the boy who once dodged steamboats on the Mississippi. "He's gone to ground," Huck murmurs, his voice low, rough with the river's edge, but he ain't invisible. Tom nods, his eyes on the bridge ahead, its planks slick with damp, the Seine murmuring below like a conspirator. "He's got the sapphire," he says, his voice soft but steady, "but he's still in Paris." We find him, we find it. The fog thickens, a veil that muffles the city's sounds, the creak of a shutter, the soft toll of a distant bell, and they move with purpose, their steps soft but sure, drawn toward the marais where Lupin's trail might linger. The air smells of wet plaster and roasted chestnuts, the latter faint from a vendor's cart abandoned hours before. This is not the Paris of gilded dreams, but a city of grit and guile, where every corner hides a hustle, every shadow a scheme. They cross the bridge, the wood creaking under their boots, and the marais unfolds around them, its streets alive with the faint hum of late-night taverns and the clatter of a carriage rattling past. The air carries the warm, yeasty scent of bread from a bakery stirring early, its ovens glowing through fogged windows. Huck's stomach rumbles, a reminder of meals missed, but his eyes are sharp, catching on a boy no older than 12, leaning against a wall, his cap pulled low. The boy's fingers toy with a coin, flipping it in the moonlight, and his grin is sharp, unchildlike. Tom pauses, his hand tightening on Huck's arm, and as they approach, the fog cools against their skin. "Have you seen a fella?" Tom asks, his voice easy, like he's bartering for apples back in Hannibal. Sharp dresser smells like a flower shop. The boy's eyes flicker, weighing them, and his grin widens, a blade in the quiet. "Maybe," he says, his French clipped but clear, laced with the street's cadence. "But seeing costs more than asking." Huck's chuckle is low, almost a growl, and he leans closer, his shadow falling over the boy. "We ain't got coin," he says, his voice rough but steady. "But we got memory. Forget us, and we forget you." The boy's grin falters, and he jerks his chin toward a narrow alley. "Rue des Rosiers," he says. He likes the shadows there. Tom tosses the boy a franc, its glint swallowed by nimble fingers, and they move on, the fog parting like a curtain. The air tastes of damp wool and anticipation, the city's pulse quickening as they near the Rue des Rosiers, a street known for its crumbling houses and whispered deals. The marais is a different beast at night, its grandeur peeled away, its bones laid bare. The air smells of wine and damp stone, a reminder of taverns spilling secrets and alleys guarding them. They slip into the alley, its walls close and slick, the cobblestones uneven under their boots. The sound of a fiddle drifts from a window above, slow and mournful, its notes weaving through the fog. Huck pauses, his hand resting on a crumbling brick wall, and tilts his head, listening. "Hear that?" he murmurs, his voice barely louder than the fog's hum. Tom stops, ears straining. At first, there's nothing but the city's breath. The soft patter of drizzle, the creak of a sign swaying in the breeze. Then, faint but unmistakable, comes the sound of laughter, soft and silken like a blade drawn across velvet. Tom's heart quickens, his hand on his knife, and Huck's grin returns, fierce with the thrill of the hunt. "That's him," Tom says, his voice low, a spark of the boy who once chased treasure in caves. They move deeper into the alley, the air dense with the scent of moss and rust, the walls closing in like the pages of a well-worn book. The laughter fades, but the scent of lavender lingers, a ghostly thread pulling them forward. The alley opens into a small courtyard, its flagstones cracked and slick, a single lantern casting a golden glow that barely reaches the edges. The air here smells of wood smoke and stale wine, the remnants of some forgotten gathering, and Tom's eyes scan the shadows, catching on a figure leaning against a doorway. Not Lupin, but a woman. Her shawl frayed, her eyes sharp in the lantern's glow. She steps forward, her voice low, her French rough but clear. "You're chasing a ghost," she says, her gaze weighing them. "He's already gone." Huck's eyes narrow, his matchstick shifting, and his voice is rough, steady with suspicion. "Gone where?" he asks, leaning closer, his shadow falling over her. The woman's lips twitch, a smile that doesn't reach her eyes, and she pulls a folded paper from her shawl, its edges damp but intact. "He left this," she says, tossing it to Tom. "Says it's for the fools who follow." Tom catches the paper, his fingers brushing its rough surface, and unfolds it under the lantern's glow. The handwriting is elegant, a flourish of ink. The sapphire travels, monsieur. Catch it in London if you dare. The air tastes of ash and resolve, the city's rhythm pulling them forward, and Tom's eyes meet Huck's, a silent vow forged in years of friendship. London, Huck murmurs, his voice low, rough with defiance. He's still playing us still. Tom's grin is fierce, a spark of the boy who never backed down. Then we play back, he says, his mind already crossing the channel, chasing a jewel that's more than wealth. It's a challenge, a skissy. The woman steps back, her shadow merging with the fog, and her voice drifts back, faint but clear. Good luck, she says, her tone laced with pity. The fog thickens, a cocoon around them, and the air smells of wax and earth, a strange mix that clings to the courtyard stones. They move from the alley, the city's pulse steady in their ears, their boots scuffing softly against the cobblestones, carrying them toward a new horizon where Lupin waits, the sapphire's song echoing in their hearts. Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn stand at the edge of Paris's fog-draped docks, the sapphire's song a faint echo in their hearts as they board a steamer bound for London. The air is thick with the briny tang of the scene and the sharp, oily scent of tar from the wharf's weathered planks. Their boots creak on the gangplank, each step a quiet vow to chase Arsène Lupin through a new city's maze. Tom's hand grips the crumpled note. Catch it in London if you dare. Its ink smudged but burning with challenge, while Huck's eyes scan the deck, catching the flicker of a sailor's lantern swaying in the dawn's grey light. The steamer's whistle cuts through the fog, low and mournful, and Paris fades behind them, its spires swallowed by mist. Can you feel their resolve? The pull of a jewel that's more than wealth, drawing two river rats across the sea to a city of smoke and secrets? The steamer churns through the channel, its engine a steady thrum beneath their feet, the air heavy with salt and coal dust. Tom leans against the railing, his coat patched and stiff with damp, the chill seeping into his bones. His mind turns over Lupin's taunt, the woman's warning, the sapphire's blue fire that slipped through their fingers. Huck chews a matchstick, his grin crooked but fierce, a spark of the boy who once drifted down the Mississippi. The deck is alive with passengers, merchants in worn suits, families clutching bundles, each sailor muttering in a tongue that's neither French nor English. The air tastes of brine and anticipation, the sea's rhythm rocking them toward a city they've only heard in tales. London's bigger than Paris, Huck murmurs, his voice low, rough with the river's edge, his eyes on the horizon where fog meets sky. Tom nods, his hand resting on the knife in his pocket, its handle worn smooth by restless fingers. Bigger traps too, he says, his voice soft but steady, a flicker of the boy who conned a town into painting a fence. The steamer's bell clangs, marking the hour, and the air shifts, cooler now, laced with the faint scent of tobacco from a passenger nearby. This is not the Mississippi's open water, but a grey expanse that hides as much as it reveals, a fitting stage for Lupin's next act. London's docks emerge from the fog, a sprawl of cranes and warehouses, the air thick with the acrid bite of coal smoke and the briny musk of the Thames. Their boots hit the cobblestones, uneven and slick, each step a pulse in the city's chaotic rhythm. The streets hum with life, vendors hawking pies and papers, their voices sharp and overlapping, cabbies shouting over the clatter of hooves. The air tastes of soot and grease, a city that churns with industry and ambition, its grandeur marred by the hollow eyes of beggars curled in doorways. Tom's coat brushes against a wall, its brick blackened by years of smoke, and Huck's eyes scan the crowd, catching on a boy no older than 10, his fingers darting into a gentleman's pocket. The boy's grin, quick and knowing, mirrors their own boyhood mischief, and Huck's chuckle is soft, warm in the chill air. They move toward Whitechapel, where Lupin's trail might linger, the streets narrowing, the houses leaning close, their windows smudged with grime. The air smells of damp wool and cheap gin, the latter spilling from a tavern's open door, its laughter rough, but alive. Tom pauses at a corner, his hand tightening on Huck's arm, and they duck into an alley, its walls cold and slick under their palms. The fog is thicker here, a veil that muffles the city's sounds, the creak of a cart, the soft wail of a violin from a window above. The air carries the faint scent of lavender, a ghostly thread that sets Tom's heart racing. "He's close," he whispers, his voice low, fierce with the thrill of the hunt. Huck nods, his matchstick shifting, his eyes sharp in the gloom. "Or he wants us to think so," he murmurs, his voice rough but steady, leaning against a crumbling brick wall. The alley opens into a small courtyard, its cobblestones cracked and slick, a single gas lamp casting a sickly glow. The air here smells of wood smoke and stale beer, the remnants of some forgotten gathering, and Tom's eyes scan the shadows, catching on a figure leaning against a doorway. Not Lupin, but a man, his coat patched and heavy, his face half lit by the lamp. He steps forward, his voice low, his English clipped but clear. "You're the Yanks, ain't ya?" he says, his gaze weighing them. "Heard you're chasing a ghost." Tom's hand rests on his knife, but his voice is easy, like he's bartering for apples back in Hannibal. "Might be," he says, his grin a challenge. "You know where ghosts hide." The man's lips twitch, a smile that doesn't reach his eyes, and he pulls a folded paper from his coat, its edges damp but intact. "He left this," he says, tossing it to Tom. "Says it's for the fools who follow." Tom catches the paper, his fingers brushing its rough surface, and unfolds it under the lamp's glow. The handwriting is elegant, a flourish of ink. "The sapphire rests in Mayfair, monsieur. Find me at the gala if you're bold." Huck's eyes narrow, his voice low, rough with suspicion. "A gala?" he murmurs, his mind on the sapphire, Lupin's games, the city's traps. Tom's grin is fierce, a spark of the boy who never backed down. "He's daring us," he says, his mind already weaving plans. Mayfair's grand houses, silk gowns, a jewel hidden in plain sight. The air tastes of ash and resolve, the city's pulse quickening, and they move from the courtyard, the fog parting like a curtain. The streets of Whitechapel hum around them, their rhythm alive with hunger and hustle, vendors shouting, their voices a chorus of survival. They find a lodging house, its walls sagging, the air thick with the scent of mildew and cheap tobacco. The landlady, her shawl frayed, eyes them warily but takes their coins, her hands rough from years of labour. The room is small, its window rattling in the wind, but it's a roof, and in London that's enough. Tom spreads the note on a scarred table, its ink a promise of a new chase, and Huck lights a cigarette, the match flaring briefly. "Mayfair's a different beast," Huck says, his voice rough, exhaling smoke that curls in the dim light. "We'll need more and knives and guts." Tom nods, his fingers tapping the table, restless, his mind on the gala, the sapphire Lupin's smile. "We need a way in," he says, his voice steady, and eyes on him before he sees us. The air smells of wax and anticipation, the city's rhythm pulling them forward, and Huck's grin returns, crooked and warm. "Like old times," he says, his eyes bright with the thrill of the hunt. They plan through the night, their voices low, the fog pressing close, a cocoon against London's chill. The sapphire waits, a star in their journey's heart, and Lupin's challenge echoes, a song they'll follow through a city of smoke and shadows, determined to write their own ending. Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn step into London's Mayfair, their patched coats swapped for borrowed suits that pinch at the shoulders, the city's smoky breath curling around them like a reluctant embrace. The air is thick with the scent of polished leather and rosewater, a stark contrast to the Thames's briny tang as they approach the grand house hosting Lupin's gala. Gas lamps cast golden pools on the cobblestones, their light catching the glint of carriage wheels and silk gowns. Tom's hand brushes the forged invitation in his pocket, its ink a fragile key to this world of wealth, while Huck's eyes scan the crowd, catching the flicker of a footman's lantern. The sapphire, a jewel that's led them from Paris to this moment, sings in their minds, but Lupin's shadow and the woman's warning of its curse weave a final challenge, the pulse of a city that glitters with promise, yet hides ruin in its heart. The gala hums within, its grand hall alive with the clink of crystal and the murmur of voices, English clipped and French lilting, a tapestry of ambition and deceit. The air tastes of champagne and candle wax, the chandeliers overhead casting a warm glow that softens the faces of lords and ladies, their smiles sharp as blades. Tom's boots, polished but worn, scuff softly on the marble floor, and Huck's fingers twitch, restless without a matchstick, his grin hidden beneath a borrowed hat. This is not their world, not the Mississippi's muddy banks nor Paris's gritty alleys, but a stage where every gesture is a play, every glance a wager. They move through the crowd, their shoulders brushing silk and velvet, the air heavy with the scent of perfume and old money. Tom's eyes scan the room, catching on a figure by the grand staircase. Lupin, his tailored coat pristine, his scarf loose but deliberate, a glass of champagne in his hand. The faint scent of lavender clings to him, a thread from Paris that sets Tom's heart racing. Huck leans close, his voice low, rough with the river's edge. "He's got it on him," he murmurs, his eyes on Lupin's pocket, where a faint bulge suggests the sapphire's weight. Tom nods, his hand resting on the knife hidden beneath his jacket, its handle a steady anchor. "We end this tonight," he says, his voice soft but fierce, a flicker of the boy who once conned a town into painting a fence. The music swells, a waltz that weaves through the air, its notes light but insistent, and the crowd parts, revealing the woman from Paris. Her cloak replaced by a gown of deep emerald, her eyes sharp and unyielding. She moves with purpose, her steps a dance that draws every eye, and Tom's breath catches his mind on her warning. It's not wealth, it's ruin. She pauses near Lupin, her gaze locking with his, and their exchange is silent but charged, a duel of glances that speaks of shared secrets. Huck's hand tightens on Tom's arm, his voice a whisper, rough with suspicion. "She's in on it," he says, his eyes narrowing. "Always was." The air shifts, heavy with the scent of roses and anticipation, and Tom feels the city's pulse, alive within these walls. They edge closer, weaving through the crowd, their borrowed suits a fragile disguise against the gala's scrutiny. The woman's voice carries low and urgent as she leans toward Lupin, her French polished but sharp. "You've played too long," she says, her words slicing through the music. Lupin's smile is a blade, warm but guarded, and he sips his champagne, his eyes flicking to the crowd, to Tom and Huck, though they're hidden in the shadows. "The game ends when I say," he says, his voice smooth as the Thames at midnight. Tom's heart pounds, his mind racing with plans and pitfalls. The sapphire, the woman, Lupin, all threads in a tapestry they've yet to unravel. He nods to Huck, a silent vow forged in years of friendship, and they slip toward a side door, its brass handle cool under Tom's palm. The hallway beyond is dim, its air thick with the scent of polished wood and old books, and they move silently, their boots soft on the carpet. The sound of the waltz fades, replaced by the faint tick of a clock, a reminder of time slipping away. What would you have done, dear listener? Stepped into the lion's den, or turned back, knowing the prize comes with a curse? They find a study, its door ajar, the air heavy with the scent of leather and ink. A desk sits in the centre, its surface scarred but gleaming, and Tom's eyes catch on a small box, its lid inlaid with mother of pearl. Huck's voice is barely a whisper, rough with certainty. "He wouldn't leave it there," he says, his eyes scanning the shadows. Tom shakes his head, his grin fierce, and opens the box, revealing a velvet pouch. The sapphire spills into his hand, its blue fire catching the moonlight streaming through a window, and the air tastes of iron and triumph, the city's rhythm quickening in their veins. Footsteps echo, sharp in the quiet, and Lupin steps into the study, his eyes bright with amusement. "Monsieur," he says, his voice a caress, "you're persistent." The woman follows, her gown a dark ripple, her eyes sharp with defiance. "And foolish," she says, her voice low, weighted with warning. Tom's hand tightens on the sapphire, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "We're taking it," he says, his eyes on Lupin, then her, curse or no curse. Huck's grin is crooked, his hand on his knife, and his voice is rough, steady with defiance. "We've faced worse curses," he says, his eyes on the doorway where shadows shift. Lupin's laughter is soft, a melody that dances with the moonlight, and he steps closer, his hands empty but dangerous. "The sapphire's a key," he says, his voice warm but sharp, "to a vault that holds more than gold. Keep it, and you'll learn its price." The woman's eyes flicker, her voice low, urgent. "It's blood, not wealth," she says, her gaze locking with Tom's. "Every hand that holds it bleeds." The air grows heavier, the scent of lavender and leather mingling with the study's dust, and Tom feels the city's gaze, its secrets deeper than any river's depths. The sound of the boots echoes in the hallway, guards or guests, and Huck's voice is a whisper, rough with urgency. "Time's up," he says, his eyes on the door. Tom slips the sapphire into his pocket, its weight a promise and a burden, and they move toward the window, its frame rattling in the wind. Lupin's smile doesn't falter, his eyes bright with delight. "London's only the beginning," he says, his voice fading as they climb through, the fog swallowing them whole. The woman's voice drifts after them, faint but clear. "Run, but you won't escape it." The streets of Mayfair blur past, the fog cool against their skin, the air thick with the scent of coal smoke and damp wool. Their boots pound the cobblestones, each step a pulse in the city's chaotic rhythm, and Tom's hand grips the sapphire, its fire burning through his pocket. Huck's breath clouds in the chill, his grin fierce, a spark of the boy who never backed down. They reach the docks, the Thames murmuring below, its voice a lullaby for a city of smoke and shadows. A steamer waits, its lantern swaying, and they board, the sapphire a star in their journey's heart. As London fades into the fog, Tom pulls the jewel from his pocket, its blue fire catching the dawn's first light. Huck's eyes meet his, a silent vow forged in years of mischief and loyalty. "Worth it," Huck murmurs, his voice rough but warm. Tom's grin is faint but real, the boy from Hannibal alive in his eyes. "We'll find out," he says, his voice steady, the sapphire's song a quiet hum in their hearts. The steamer churns toward the horizon, the air tasting of salt and resolve, and they leave the city behind, its secrets safe, their tale complete. For now, in a world where every jewel tells a story, and every story carries a price. That's our tale for tonight, dear dreamers. Tell me, are you listening from Tokyo at twilight, Cairo past midnight, or Paris beneath the early stars? Share your thoughts, your time zone, and your favourite moment. If you feel the shadows stir, like and subscribe to keep the stories alive. Keep your lanterns lit, your thoughts soft, and your heart open. Sleep well until our next gentle descent into the past.